Welcome to the July 2024 edition of Graphonomics. This month we have a really special treat for you. I'm Danny Clayton. Dr. Brian Jacobsen, our chief economist, is here. Brian.
Thanks for having me.
I really like this stuff. There's not a graphics store out there, so where do you come up with these graphs?
You know, it really comes from just reading the news and digging into the details and figuring out what's going on in the world.
So let's talk about this graph. But the trend on this graph, it looks downward. Will it continue downward? Isn't that one thing that the Fed cautioned that we might see in the process of trying to get rates down?
That's right. So the chart here is showing the ratio of the number of job openings to the number of people unemployed. So you can think of it as if you are unemployed, how many jobs are out there possibly for you if you're in the right place and have the right skill.
Let's say I'm an engineer, I'm working in a manufacturing field. Does this graph tell me anything?
Oh, well, you know, it tells me a lot of things as an economist, but as an engineer, it might not really mean much to them at all. It really is about the bigger macroeconomic picture. It's more for trying to answer that question about whether or not the Federal Reserve is going to think that their job is done.
Let's talk about this chart. It's kind of interesting. It shows inflation averages 1.8% across many different presidential and congressional election cycles. Is inflation dependent on who's in office?
It can. It doesn't necessarily have to be, and I think that's one of the powerful things about this chart.
You said this a number of times on our radio shows. Falling inflation does not mean falling prices.
So true. It is one of the biggest disconnects between policymakers and the public.
Historically speaking, recently, we've seen service prices have an impact on inflation. Has this been true through history?
Service prices have affected inflation, but not to the same extent that they have lately. Prior to COVID, on average for consumer spending, services made up about 60% of what people spent their money on. Now it's up to something closer to about 64 to 65%.
Here's a graph with a pretty direct impact on our lives. Will a rate cut have a negative impact on the economy?
It doesn't have to. And I think that's one of the really powerful things about this chart. Also, I just like the colors in it. I think it's really pretty.
Is a rate cut going to move the housing market? And please say yes.
Yes, I think that it will. But how much?
What's a rate cut going to do for small business?
I actually think that a rate cut would be most impactful for small businesses as opposed to large businesses.
That is just a snippet of this month's Graphonomics. Learn more about what Dr. Brian Jacobsen can tell us about the economy by watching the full video. Click the link below.